Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rahul. I'm the founding director of the Center for Design, and really happy to host this final episode of our Spring Conversation Series 2026. For those who don't know what the conversations are, it is a format that we actually launched 5 years ago. Time to change, maybe. But the idea was since the beginning to try open up new research directions, invite people that we don't necessarily know or we didn't work with in the past, and experiment a little bit with new topics. This is an example of the first topics that we covered, all kinds of potential design intersections. This year, this spring series, we had two different installments. The first one was more like a workshop on well-being, reflection, that was really interesting, something new that we experimented with Laura Folano. And the second episode was about very challenging relationship between older adults and algorithms, led by Miso Kim and Mio Chang. And then we had our Design Research Week for March, and April is here. And we have the Data Theatre Collective here today with us, very well represented. And it's clearly an example of interdisciplinary collaboration. We have journalism, design, theater, comp studies, all together. Public policy. Wow, that's more than nice. It's journalism. Yeah, I mentioned. Oh yeah. The panel is very dense, but without further ado, I'll leave the stage to the moderator, Michael Majors. Dani, you're leading the thing, so stage is yours.
One moment while we switch over the slides. And I'll turn it over to Dani to start.
So, hi, small but mighty crew. I'm Dani Snyder-Young. I'm Associate Professor of Theater. I'm the Principal Investigator of the Data Theatre Collaborative and the Faculty Director of the Center for the Arts. Welcome to this, our Open Data Theatre Collaborative Reflective meeting, about 18 months into our first proof of concept project. So Data Theatre Collaborative, we use community arts workshops and participatory performances as playful ways into quantitative data. Our work is community partnered, and we work with partners who are already doing projects in which they need to tell stories with and about data. And in our processes, workshop participants and audience members take ownership over data that matters to them, and then are able to use that data in their own ongoing projects. And we do this because data is the language of power, but quantification has its limitations. So quantification is always already an abstraction of human experience. If I am one of 1,000 people who take a survey, that survey will capture some bits and pieces of information about me. And then those 1,000 people, the way they answer that survey, that information will be aggregated, abstracted, and compressed into a set of numbers that can communicate a pattern. I occupy certain nodal points in that pattern, but that abstraction and compression process, that strips away all sorts of context. It strips away all of the human motivation, all of the feelings, all of the relationships, all of the story that power why I answered the questions the way I did, the sense I make of my experiences that have to do with the answers to those questions. And for a lot of domains, that makes sense. That abstraction and compression process gets to a set of information that is really valuable. But what is lost is the context. And what data theater does is it rehumanizes the data. It invites audience members and participants to look at that pattern illustrated by the quantitative data, situate themselves in the data, and flesh out the nodal points they occupy with their own stories, experiences, and sense-making. Now, that's something we can do because we have this incredibly interdisciplinary team. Let's go to the next slide. So are here as a representative sample of Data Theatre Collaborative members, but you might notice we have a small army. So I'm Dani Snyder-Young. I am an applied theater scholar and practitioner, and I'm a dramaturg, which means my subdisciplinary specialty is I use theater as a vehicle in community partnered projects to achieve the ends that those community partners want to achieve. And I lead this merry band. This is a great time for introductions that everyone, not just at this table, but in the room who's part of us, can introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Carr. It says there I'm the resident director, which is really nice. I'm a teaching professor in the theater department. I direct plays, and I also, among other things, teach a movement improvisation technique called viewpoints, which is our strategy for getting things up on their feet really quickly.
I'm Rahul. I'm here in journalism and design as professor, and I do a lot of research on creative and appropriate ways to bring people together around data in community settings, primarily off the screen through murals and sculptures and music performance and theater.
Hi, everybody. I'm Moira Zellner. I'm in the policy school. I'm a professor there. I'm also the director of participatory modeling and data science. And what brings me to this team is in that capacity, like as a participatory modeler, meaning that I work with people to create models together of different kinds. So it's different kinds of use of data, but you know, in a collaborative setting to create these constructs that we all can agree are, you know, a picture that we put together of the system that we're part of, and use them to then guide decision making and solution building.
And I'm Michael Arnold. I'm an associate professor in the art and design department, and my research is in participatory design. And so I see some of the problems of participation that we aim to approach in this as you know, kind of seeing theater as kind of a universal adapter between folks in the community who are going about their daily lives and, you know, knowing things out there, and the policymaking process, which wants to know things about folks' daily lives and wants to make policies that are adaptive and facilitative for folks in the community. But maybe those two don't talk so well together. So I see this project as solving kind of one of these universal problems of participation, of bridging that gap. Sydney, yeah.
Hi, I'm not on the panel, but also on the team. I'm one of the PhD student affiliates. I'm a fourth year PhD student in the interdisciplinary design and media program here. And I primarily study data in the physical sphere and have a background in theater. And so I've worked as a scenic designer for the Data Theatre Club.
Dean Massey's also.
Yes, I am a researcher in a policy school, and I work on a variety of different participatory departmental projects, doing modeling with people in the community.
I think,
That's who's here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what you can see from who is here and then from the titles of the people who are not here, we have a particularly large and interdisciplinary team, and this project really meets at the intersection of our expertise. I think one of the things Northeastern does very, very well is this kind of transdisciplinary collaboration that would not be possible anywhere else. You want to go to the next slide?
Yes. Oh, Rahul, do you want to talk about our community workshop?
Actually, we're going to talk about
Sorry. Oh, I was on the right slide. Who let me in charge of this? All right, here we go.
It's all part of the info. So yeah, community workshops. So the way that we engage with community was through some partnerships that built on other partnerships that we had, right? And so in particular, I want to highlight, you know, a couple of the, well, La Colaborativa is specifically, which is one of the partnerships that I have been developing over time through the Common Senses Project. And there are two instantiations of the Common Senses Project, one in Chelsea. La Colaborativa is an organization in Chelsea really advocating for its community and doing amazing work, especially with youth programs as well as intergenerational programs. And so when we got this award, which it just became a wonderful opportunity to think of like, what if we go beyond participatory modeling and the work that we have been doing until that time and really explore this opportunity? And they immediately jumped on that. And so they really jumped right on the project and have been a wonderful partner. We've explored so many different things and prepared, some of the workshops that then led to, like other kinds of productions. With Hyde Park, I think that somebody else will talk about that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want me to talk about City of Boston or
no. Okay, so this year, the last 18 months really, we've been working on proof of concept. So we had this idea about what would it look like to try to make theater with numbers. Information design plus theater equals something cool. That was about 3 years ago that we kind of started playing with that idea. We got a little seed grant from CAMD and did some workshops in the lab theater just to answer the question, like, is it even possible to make theater with numbers? And in that initial workshop, Moira brought us an organization called Livable Streets Alliance, who they do community engagement around municipal policy around green space. And so they introduced us to Hyde Square Task Force, which is a youth development agency in Jamaica Plain that works with young people from immigrant communities. And they have a community organizing wing and they have a theater wing that talk to each other. So we did some of our first community partnered workshops at Hyde Square Task Force, seeing, okay, so now that we understand what it does to make theater, participatory theater from numbers, what does it look like to do that in a community setting with a real topic, investigating data that actually matters to people's lives? So we did a little workshop with Hyde Square Task Force and Livable Streets Alliance about 2 years ago.
Yes.
That was looking at some survey data on the redevelopment of Southwest Corridor Park. So we were basically member checking Livable Streets Alliance's survey data by doing drama workshops with teenagers, discovering actually the gaps in their data. So before I said, when there is data, it's a pattern and I'm part of it. Well, sometimes I'm supposed to be part of it, but I'm not part of it. So when I am part of the data, I can illustrate and rehumanize my spot in the pattern. If I'm supposed to be part of the pattern, but I'm not, I can interrogate and demonstrate the gaps in that data set. So we started work on this project, working with a couple of different community partners, including La Collaborativa and Hyde Square Task Force. So the Mellon Foundation gave us $500,000 to do proof of concept for this Civic Data Theatre concept. And so last summer, we did a series of community workshops with these two partners. Rahul, you want to tell us about those workshops?
Yeah, so part of the goal was to explore what happens when we ask people to do things with data with their bodies. What are people willing to do? And what do they feel uncomfortable doing? And we sort of played with that for a couple of years in various ways, but what we wanted to do was particularly check it with certain types of groups that are typically left out of civic conversations, where the impacts of those conversations are felt in their neighborhoods, and they're part of the data. And that's really important, certainly in my research. And more broadly, as data has become more central to civic decision-making in various ways, it has become even more so a language of power that impacts very real and concrete settings. And so if you're at a community meeting with the government and they're showing like an animated scatter plot, where like the sizes are changing and the colors are different, and like even with people that could make that evening meeting, 80% of them don't understand that because it's that's like the wrong language to be using for people that are coming in off the street worried about some issue. So we wanted to explore, okay, what about people that might not go to that meeting? How do we say, hey, look, here's some information we would start with a handout. Here's some information, and let's play around and try to make, in this case, make pictures of it. What's a picture of flooding in Chelsea that makes sense to you based on your experiences and what's this information that we put in front of you? And then in that workshop's case, we connected that to what could be done about it. Now that we've constructed sort of a few images of what that situation looks like and what the problems are. So the data as input source material to creating some experience with your body that tells something, a story about your experience and something connected to that data, and then using that as a way to make sense of it together and bring people together in a way that's more fun and engaging. That's a driver of that set of workshops. It was like 6 workshops or something like that over the summer.
Too many workshops.
It was a lot of workshops. It turned out people were really excited to play with us together. So we put our brains together. That was one of the first points where we were able to really work across the disciplines to start to say, okay, what does a workshop mean to you? What does a workshop mean to me? What does it mean to this community? What do we get for dinner? All the important questions that make a good experience with people. And I think that was one of the first places where we started to see the productive friction about like how those different fields can come together.
Yeah, they were surprisingly meaningful to them and to us.
Yeah, to
Right? Both at, like as source material, as you're saying, but I'll say that, I'm going to talk in a second about that. But I started thinking about these workshops as like theater games that I'm not so interested in. Which is to say, not really what I do in the theater work that I make, and was delighted to find that in people bringing themselves to it, they were bringing something real that we could then build some more interesting theater out of. And so there was an experiential thing for participants to do and to kind of wake up their individual perspective to, that then translated to us into food for actual production, something we're going to make in a more polished way.
So, yeah. No, I just wanted to add that also for me, having worked, for example, with La Colaborativa for an extended period of time, I had been working before, this collaboration, and I had learned so much with them about the issues that we then did workshops on. And every single time, I mean, I was floored by how much more these kinds of activities brought into the conversations and dimensions of the problem that we hadn't even thought of, as well as like ways forward towards addressing.
So this larger project we were working on, this is a Civic Data Theatre project in which we had a government partner, and that was the Mayor's Office of the Environment. We found our way to them to work on helping to collect community wisdom and feedback on their climate action plan for the city of Boston. So we started before the community workshops last summer with this goal of having those workshops feed community wisdom into the climate action planning process. But what we very quickly discovered was that the actual teenagers in the actual youth development organizations we were working in, while we did find our way to topics that were broadly aligned with climate justice, they were not actually all that interested in the very specific granular pieces of the climate action plan. And when faced with conflict between what we said we'd do and what the people we were working with actually needed, we did the thing the people we were working with actually needed. And so we did 5 different workshops on 5 totally different topics with 5 different groups of people, which is why we are all like, oh, it was too much work. We were expecting to do 1 topic, 1 data set, 1 lesson plan we replicated multiple times. So we learned some things. This fall, then we came back to campus to devise an original interactive play in collaboration with the Department of Theater. And this production then really focused on feeding community wisdom into the climate action planning process. And so we met with the mayor's office, we went through the climate action plan, and they had some very specific survey questions that they wanted answers to. And we found the pieces of the climate action plan that seemed like they would be most relevant to an audience who would come to Northeastern University to participate in an interactive play, and the survey questions that we thought we might somehow be able to wrangle into something like a performance. So Jonathan was the director of this devised or original made from scratch performance.
Yeah, and so thinking about how that works, I think it's helpful to think about the difference between that and what I typically do. So in my role as a director, I tend to think structurally and compositionally about material that already exists. Like there's a script, I'm trying to find ways to make that vivid for a specific audience at a specific moment. So it all depends on the play and what we're trying to do with it. And then I sit at the center of a collaboration with a bunch of artists who are trying to make this thing happen. And my role is to define the vision and the process for bringing it to life. So what we're making, why, and then how, right? What, why, how, and repeat as needed. In this case, we didn't have the what. We're starting without the what. And the most interesting thing we've got for a what is a survey, which is frankly not that interesting. So it also isn't, a survey is also not what it was going to be about. So we started looking for that. And because we were without a community partner per se, as the center of this, it became clear quite quickly that what it was going to be about was the company that was making it. And so the people, as people are the interesting part of the data in the first place, in this case, we were going to look at the people who were involved. And so that was the designers and the company, the actors, and figuring out that the real what in it was us, and what it was about was going to be our relationship to data, the role that data plays in our lives, why, to ask how we might use that data to come together to face our really big challenges. Climate change is a really big challenge. That's a unifying thing. So we're looking at, in this production, which we ended up calling the numbers, how much we were willing to fight to make change. From there into the how gets kind of easier because it's a familiar process of bringing material together and refining it and making connections and creating structure. But in order to do it, just the quickest version of it is that I trained the cast in this movement technique called viewpoints that I mentioned before, and then asked everybody in the production, from the designers down to each cast member, to bring in a reflection of some kind about the role that data played in their lives. Some of those were really personal and specific. Some of them were broader and related pretty easily directly to the climate change stuff. And so we used those different pieces in different ways, depending on how they fit together. But the rehearsal process was really, today we're working on something that you brought in, and we're going to build a bunch of different stagings based on that, and iterate, and then, create a cue card. Here's where that goes, maybe, and start shaping things all along those lines. There's a lot to say about the individual pieces of the process, but I would say half of it was that, figuring out how to make Sydney's part of the play, figuring out how to make the actress part as part of the play. The Sydney's was the set, and it was all over the play, but other people's were, individual sections that we talked about. And the other half was basically doing data theater workshop stuff with the climate change data. So in order to bring other things that were part of the survey, we did the same things that we did at La Collaborativa, the same things that we did at High School Task Force, to create data pieces and then build those in. So in the end, I will say the production satisfied my goal to make dynamic theater, but also was like emotionally resonant and thought-provoking for audiences, from data experts to data averse. People who didn't know they had a connection to that material, and people who came in passionate about it. And so, strong proof of concept. What we didn't have was a specific community to bring it to that was at the center of the issue. Stay tuned, that's next.
So something Jonathan didn't talk about is that the audience, so this was a participatory play in which the theatrical event was a data input activity, in which audience members were giving feedback and opinions and participating in the play. The audience data was then manifest in theatrical language on stage, and then was recorded and documented to be reported back to the mayor's office to feed wisdom into the climate action plan. So it started as quantitative data, became theatrical language. The audience then fed participation that we turned into quantitative data that we sent as a quantitative report back to the mayor's office.
Yeah, and sorry, you're right. I'm talking about this. So there was making it legible, and then also making it legible back to the audience itself. So in different sections of it, the way that they responded to something would be made manifest on the stage based on where they were all standing on platforms, so they could see a visualization of it, based on sonifying it in one case, so a soundtrack of the production changed, based on voting, so that different parts of the stage were moved around based on collection of people's views, based on the aggregation of the views of the views of the audience, and based on what I would call a data sculpture over time, which is the collection of ribbons, each marking a person with a given view in this case, people who struggle to stay cool in the summer, that built up over the course of the production. So there were all of these ways that what I just said in the audience is now on the stage.
And Sydney's beautiful set was an extended data physicalization, that it was a physicalization of climate data that looked like a pretty set that was functional in some theatrical ways, that over time it was revealed the meaning that the data encoded into it made.
Easter eggs.
Yeah.
Next steps.
Yeah, let's talk about what's happening next. What's happening with this publication?
What conference is this?
Josie put this in today.
I don't know what that one is.
Someone is writing.
Sorry, we are, so one of the, we're writing in a couple different ways academically, right? So one of our points is to sort of make academic production of academic knowledge about this technique to both sort of lend credence to community activities that are doing similar things, but also like communicate and document and connect with people that are interested in similar questions. So we had a paper on one of our workshops at last year's IEEE Viz as a talking about one of our workshops is input visualization. So creating data through embodied themes at one of our workshops. And Sydney represented that paper, and that was a lot of fun to sort of write and document and share there. Now we're thinking about other outputs that come out. We had a paper a while back in arts.
Art.
Yeah, about some earlier work. There's some connected work I'm doing around translating data journalism stories into short scenes. That is, I think, what she's referring to there, that we're working on now. So we have a lot of threads going in parallel, which is fun because we all sort of publish or connect with different communities because we're an interdisciplinary team. So it's been fun to learn how to sort of communicate in those different languages, and then also find ways that sort of can reinforce our other work. So that's probably the left-hand one.
I think there's also a presentation at the Boston Area Research Institute conference coming up in just initiative. Thank you, coming up in just a few weeks here, and
we'll
book
be doing
chapter.
and we're working on a book chapter for an audience studies book. We're doing a workshop at the Association of Theater and Higher Education conference this summer. We get around, and we each get around facing our own distinct disciplinary audiences, and then feed that feedback back into the team. But the summer tour,
I was gonna say the other thing.
the big thing that we're setting up to do. So this is a 3-step proof of concept process. We did workshops in community settings. We did a participatory performance piece on campus. And now we're fusing the two, and we're doing a participatory community-based interactive performance that we will be touring to community sites this summer. So we're working with two graded ensembles. Jonathan's going to be directing an ensemble of artists mostly from Northeastern, and Josie Ross, who's a doctoral student in our lab, she's going to be directing an ensemble of young people from Hyde Square Task Force, one of our community partners. And they'll be building an interactive performance that will perform in outdoor locations, one near and for an audience of Hyde Square Task Force, one near and for an audience of La Collaborativa, and one right here in Centennial Common for us, August 8th. Stay tuned. If you sign up for the Center for the Arts listserv, I promise I will send you everything. And so this will be an interactive play. We don't actually know what this performance piece will be about yet. So the climate action plan's public comment period is closed. The city doesn't actually need us to feed community wisdom into that particular piece anymore. And one of the things that we learned through all of our work is that the people in the room, in the creative process, need to be people who have a stake in the matter of concern. And so we're in a couple of weeks going to meet with our company and make a decision about the central topic for this summer performance. We'll probably build on some pieces that we worked with last fall in the numbers and figure out exactly what this interactive performance will be about. I think we've now exhausted everything we know about the summer production.
Well, I had some questions. I've been a part of this thing the whole way through, but I had some questions for you guys, and And I think we want to take an opportunity to take questions from the audience too, as this winds down. Something you said earlier, Rahul, is like one of those things that I think we say to each other a lot in this project. And I was wondering if everybody could give kind of their take on this. What is it, when we talk about like, oh, this process is going to give us an embodied understanding of data. What does that mean? What does that mean to have this embodied understanding of data? And maybe how is it different from how might your body feel differently understanding data versus your mind? If we're going to go back to the old Cartesian dualism. Do you want to kick us off, Rahul?
Oh yeah, I can start. So for me, one of the things that, again, from the disciplines I come from, one of the things that I also studied was pedagogy and epistemology, so like ways that we learn and know things. And there's a very traditional in the US approach of sort of valuing abstract information, abstract ways of knowing things. And I think charts and graphs are a great like representation of that. They are like an abstract representation of something using symbols that have like a grammar to them. And I think that works in lots of settings, and it's a really useful set of things. But that system is part of a larger set of beliefs about what's important and whose knowledge is important. So in pedagogy, it means that we study like mathematical and those things, and we've devalued things like apprenticeship models, right? I think in data, it means that people that, in data in civic society, it means that people that can sort of, things that get counted and things that we can count become more important because they can be represented through abstract ways of knowing things. When you use your body to represent something or try to do that, you're suddenly in a different playground. You're in a playground where you can represent lots of things. Like you can represent anger in a way that like a number with like an emoji doesn't really capture, right? And so you can not only represent something different, so there's a broader set of things that we can engage, you can also impact people differently. Like nobody cries at the bar chart, right? But even they look at it, it's like nobody's gonna cry at a bar chart, right? Even if it's about something really serious. It just doesn't provoke that kind of, it doesn't pull on those strings of your life, of you as a person. Whereas like even representing that same information that might be in a bar chart in some physical way changes the opportunity to engage an audience. So, and their experience as an audience is going to be different because they build knowledge differently. So those are some of the pieces I care about.
And if I can build on that, like the part that for me is important about this and the wonderful opportunity is, as somebody who's in policy, we're interested in change, right? And in action. And so on one hand, hopefully people don't necessarily cry all the time, but there are other emotions that go into mobilizing people into action or into demanding a particular kind of action. And so that opportunity is also like just powerful about this technique of like what actually mobilizes us as a society, as a collective, to then do something about things to change.
Well, I think that's one of the amazing things about theater being a part of this, is it really gives you an opportunity. You guys know like tacit knowledge, this phrase, the audience. Tacit knowledge is kind of like the knowledge of like riding a bicycle, of like, and you kind of have a feel of how to ride a bike. You can't necessarily say, oh, well, you just sit up straight and you keep your spine so, and you pedal your feet. But the tacit knowledge is I have the feel for kind of balance. And I think one of the lovely things that theater does in this process is gives us a feel for the data in that same sense. You can kind of come to know the data through that felt or tacit sense. Jonathan, one of my favorite things you say in the workshops is that, and now we're going to play with the data, right? And I'm always like, oh, that's such a nice like way of opening the access. But I like in theater, like that word play has so much richness to it that maybe in design I think of just like, oh, toys or like video games. Like what does it really mean to play with the data?
Yeah, so when I think about the spirit of play, and the way that I try to work with it in the rehearsal room, it's tricky because we play hard, right? Like on some level, we want to lower the barrier to entry and make it friendly and say, come on, this is going to be light, this is going to be easy, it's going to be fun. And then also, you know, that's how I might approach somebody in a participatory workshop who might not be confident about doing theater. But we play in my rehearsals too, except when we're playing in there, we're sweating, right? So it's hard work, but we have to be willing to try something silly. We have to be willing to try something that might be a little bit embarrassing. Those pictures, go back to pictures of the community workshop. I'm thinking about the multi-generational teams that were building pictures of flooding.
Yeah.
And the levels of willingness, embarrassment, and just the different barriers they had to just even being willing to stand up. And those who wanted to shine and those who wanted to sit back. So play it is in part a leveler to get us all, so we might all participate while playing games before. And then, yeah, I would say for me, then it's a demand to bring your whole self to it. To play like it matters.
Do you find that you're approaching play a little differently when the source material is a spreadsheet versus a narrative?
I mean, that's what's been so interesting about this whole thing. Back from the Livable Streets process and on through everything we've done. I mean, I'll say like selfishly, for me, one of my reasons that I wanted to get into this was that it's hard to find a play I want to direct. And I was excited to get to sit down with somebody who was already excited about something, say, fine, I'll take your thing. You know, I was feeling that I was saying that I was content agnostic at the time. Didn't think that the exciting source material I would find would be a bar chart or a spreadsheet. Thought it would be, you know, something exciting that discovered about apes or something. I don't know what. We were just looking for researchers, period. It turned out that actually it's exactly the same. You have to find what the speech is inside of it if there's speech. But since viewpoints in my work, I start physically anyway, that the language of the two is shockingly similar. And so the thrill and surprise was that the emotional connection to the audience would be just as strong if we're talking about representing a histogram, a collection of voices, or a spreadsheet that we had to break down in a few different ways, as it is to a soliloquy or a scene or some complex event that's written in the play.
Because data is already telling a story. And so what we're doing is finding that story and manifesting it.
Well, normally when we get into those stories, though, in like theater, right, we talk about like suspending disbelief. You know, we're going to go into the theater and we're going to sit down and watch what's happening on the stage and believe those people are actually these other people who they're not, right? But in data theater, we have a little bit of a different problem because the data that we're essentially reconstituting is the data from people's lived experience. Like, how do you wrestle with that? How do you hold both of those at the same time?
Oh, the idea that theater is a made-up story in which we're going to agree to believe this fiction, that's a very particular genre and style of theater. It's not all exists. So that's psychological realism, that's acting via American method, in which I behave in a realistic way, pretending to be someone I'm not. But there are traditions of theater that don't do that at all. And so we work within a mode that's much more Brechtian, that asks the audience to like think critically and recognize that what they're seeing is a representation and then make sense of it and their relationship to it. And so it's actually a totally established set of theatrical techniques. It's just based in Brecht rather than Stanislavski.
And Boal.
Boal works off of a Brechtian model.
Yes.
Augusto Boal is a Brazilian theater director from the late 20th century who was one of my teachers, whose Theater of the Oppressed. It's a participatory theater technique that uses theater as a language that anyone can use.
Well, I think that was one of the reasons. This is another overlap. This is one of the reasons that this collaboration works. Is that pedagogy I study comes from a similar grounding set of principles. So even though we were across different fields in our community engagement work, there was a shared set of pedagogical principles about why we learn, the way we learn, and the way we build that we could all pull from.
Yeah.
I guess I also want to say this though about on some level you're asking I don't know if you said a version of this wording before, but do we need to be skeptical, or how do we want to typically we're suspending these beliefs and want to find some way to maintain or remove or maintain our critical distance. A thing that we found out pretty early, again, in early workshops and then on through, is that the way that we framed it was powerful, and that the implied meaning of it was going to come across very strongly. And so we had to kind of be sure we're getting it right. And one thing that we learned early on is that we didn't actually feel comfortable representing somebody else's story because we could so easily get it wrong.
And it's a form of appropriation in a way that just didn't feel right.
Well, so let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
The abstraction process that compresses data into numbers and strips away context, strips away all of the information that someone who is not represented in the data would need in order to understand what's actually happening in the lives of the people whose data it is. And so if the we in the workshop or the we in the rehearsal studio are represented in the data, we can fill that in with our tacit knowledge. If the we in the rehearsal studio or the we in the workshop are supposed to be represented, but we're not, we're still learning something about the data in our conspicuous absence. But if the we in the workshop, the we in the rehearsal studio are not supposed to be represented by this data, this is somebody else's story, well, it doesn't give us enough. And so for us to bring ourselves to this data, the instinct is to situate ourselves in the data.
Yeah.
But if that data is about someone who I don't actually know anything about, I'm just making shit up. And at best, it's unhelpful to understand the data. And at worst, it's actively harmful and dangerous because it's misrepresenting the lived experience and sense making of the people the data is actually about.
In my work, I also do some work in medical decision making, and we have a little phrase of you in this context, you have no right to be wrong.
In this case, those meanings are built on our bodies, right? We're representing something with our body. If my body is an instrument, it already tells its own story, right? There's a story that my body is telling just that you all can recognize right now. All of our bodies tell this story, so I have to be careful about which stories I bring my body to.
This kind of pivots a little bit to Moira's, we're talking about how that data compresses, really the data works in a couple ways. It can either throw out essential information, or it can make a mathematical compression, a mathematical approximation of what's going on in the data. That we talk about that structure. And this kind of directly to your work, Moira, is the participatory model making. Is this theater work a kind of model then for this? Are we making simplifications too, or approximations in
Absolutely
in the studio?
I mean, I think that definitely we all do. We do it differently depending on who's in that studio, right? And what we're trying to represent, but we're always modeling, right? We're always simplifying that reality through, even through our bodies, right? And through our whatever movement we do in these workshops, as much as we do it computationally and with the methods that we do in my class, and I have a couple of my students here. So we're always simplifying, and we're always abstracting and creating. And so we really have to, and filtering. And so we've got to be always careful about what it is that we're including, where it comes from, what the assumptions are, what are we leaving out, who are we leaving out, being really just acknowledging that, being honest and transparent about that, so that then we can make sure that we can derive the best meaning or make the best sense out of what we're doing. But like understanding also its limitations and its boundaries.
I mean, when do those limitations become like when are they really useful? Like we could say like, oh, there's the model of the Earth goes around the sun, right? And we all have that model, right? Anybody not have that model?
Well, there may be some.
There might be the flat earthers in the room. But you know, is the Earth is being dragged through the galaxy in a helical pattern as the Milky Way rotates on its axis? You know, that's a really different model of what's going on. You know, like when is it? But I feel like still the Earth goes around the sun. That's pretty useful approximation of what's actually happening. When do we know that these like approximations are good, useful, helpful, and when are they like, oh yeah, we're leaving something critical out? How do you draw that line?
Well, I think that the best thing is to understand two things. One is all models are wrong, some are useful, right?
Mm.
And so if you're thinking of what makes it useful, you've got to think of a purpose. What is the purpose of our modeling to understand then if our model is useful for that purpose? But I think that in all of these contexts, again, all of these have limitations. Just make sure that whatever we're doing, we're grounding it on purpose. We do have like an ethical approach also to the engagement in that collaborative process of model building and model using. But like even, you know, I mean, we were kind of like chuckling about the flat earthers, but like even within that context, that model is useful. I mean, to go from here to there, flat earth model works perfectly fine. I don't need to think of the curvature of the earth, right? Or like the fact that we're going around the sun. So like, again, it really just depends on never do more than what is really necessary for that purpose, because then you're wasting resources and time, and it's an effort that may not be, you know, really worthwhile, and we don't have the time for it. But instead, it's like, let's focus on what are we trying to do together? What is our purpose? And then there are different ways to address that purpose. Let's try different things. That's also the other aspect of it, of not just saying like, the model is this, but let's try an ensemble, which is in a way like what we've been doing, right? We've been trying different things, and what are we learning from those different things? And are we converging on some of those learnings? What are those? Are we diverging? What are those? And then it's like an ongoing cycle.
I guess for the flat earthers, I got up this morning and the sun was coming in the window and my house didn't feel like it was moving at all.
There you go.
Sorry,
What you're taking away from today?
It's crash.
This is recorded.
That's on YouTube.
Rahul, can we come back to you? This question of sense making is like still, you know, out there, and like, you know, through your journalism practice, like, you know, you've been like years trying to make data matter to real people in communities. Like, what does theater offer where that journalism, you know, where journalism just can't quite get to that point? What do we have? What is the superpower of this team?
So many of them. We don't wear underwear on the outside. So there's a reason. So we use the word community a lot, right? When I use it, I tend to mean a set of people in one place. So I tend to mean a geographic one, partially because like in journalism, I'm often talking about like a regional audience for a news producer. So I tend to mean that out of all the possible things it could mean. So when you live in a place, you live in an information ecosystem, right? There's lots of like ways you get information. Maybe it's at the library, maybe it's from your buddy, maybe it's from a sign on a pole, maybe it's from just some dude yelling at you about his bar chart on the street, maybe it's going to some performance, right? So I think that data journalism lives within that ecosystem, right? That's one way that information is shared. But information sharing also always comes from a source to like somebody else. And journalism is suffering from a crisis of trust in the source, like a lot of other institutions. So for me, the idea of having more channels that in that information space, that in a community that can tell and engage people around data is valuable. Not necessarily because data is awesome. I mean, I think that I work with data, but that's not the reason. The reason is because data helps you impact change in your community right now. Right? Like right now, it's a language of power, and it helps you understand something and convey that something should be changed to somebody that has the power to make a decision about it. So there's a very intentional decision for me to say, like, there's a reason that data is important to stick into these conversations and bring people around, because it's being used to decide what happens. If it was some other material, I'd be focusing on that. But right now it's that. So amongst other things. So having more ways to get people together around that for me is really important. And there's already like cool things happening around data storytelling in lots of different ways. I think we add a lot to that by making it accessible and relevant through a shift in media and a shift in narrative form. And so for me, I'm trying to get news producers to do things where if they've written a data story already, how can we turn that into like an experience at lunchtime where it brings people in to do something fun with materials and reinforces trust because you're in front of them with your face. So I'm working, I'm pulling things from our work and applying it in other domains. But that core is like it's engaging a different set of people in a way that matters.
Opening the opportunities for people to be sources and people to be reporting and people to be reading in new ways.
Yeah, and
I don't know if
it's part of that information. It's part of that information thing, right? Like, journalism exists as one point of information within a larger sphere in a community. So recognizing that is really important for journalists, and I think for data storytellers to say the box is not like the box of tools available isn't charts and graphs on a mobile device. And that's a bad set of limitations if you're trying to impact change or help someone understand something. The box needs to be much bigger. And I think data theater, community performance is another, or participatory is another point in that space.
Right. It's time to
we'll go. I was gonna say we'll go to the audience for questions in just a minute, but so if you have a question like brewing in your head, like start thinking about how to say it out loud. So we just go right to it.
That's how you can act it.
But just to kind of, Sydney and Dean are both here in the audience, and they're both kind of like our math, the most math people. I was wondering, like for you, like for you guys, like thinking about like metrics of success. Like if people come to this thing and they have this theatrical experience, but they walk away without kind of a sense of the statistical knowledge or like the power law or like what is the how driving this, like is that still a success? Do we still win at that point, or like do we need that engagement with the language of data specifically?
I think it's a great question. I mean, this is different than anything I've done before, and so it's hard to. For a regular project, it's still hard to say it's a success, whether even if it's not a theater. And so I think with this, we do have a lot of tangible things like the, of course, audience and stuff like that. But we do have the surveys about what people learned, and the mood seems to be very positive to it. So I think for a regular data project, we don't have those people. And I mean, I don't know if people get a bunch of enjoyment from just crunchy numbers or doing a regular model to work we do. And so this is definitely a more fun thing, I think, for everybody involved, for the audience and everyone else.
I think so as a person who's consumed a lot of data visualizations in various forms, I can still think of the ones immediately off the top of my head that made me feel some kind of way, right? That maybe they weren't a data viz in the traditional way, like going back to some of what Rahul was talking about, like does a bar chart make you cry?
Yeah.
Probably not. But there are visualizations that I can think of that anytime anyone's like, why do you care about this? That I go, that's why I care about it. You want to know, like, you want to see a cool visualization, go like explore this thing for an afternoon and you will keep every time I go back to it, I find something new, right? And so I think this in a lot of ways can be that experience for people. And so then does it matter if they like remember a particular statistic that we cited? Maybe they remember it better because they were shown it in people, right? Like I can still think of that gun violence statistic that we quoted because it was represented so viscerally, right? And I can quote that back to you now all these months later. And sure, I worked on the project, but not in the same kind of way as like Jonathan did. I wasn't in the like rehearsal room every day working with it. But I think it maybe matters more that people didn't necessarily remember the particular statistic than that they remembered what they felt about it, what it made them feel, and like if they want to return to it, they now have some places where they could go, right? They said, you know, we're like the city of Boston, the survey, right? And you can return to that as a way of exploring the same things.
I have something else to add too. You can kind of be about this too. Like they're really important to the story. So for this other compensation project, one of the partners brought forward this idea, which is absolutely true, just in a really simplified way that data plus stories are truth. And sure, like we usually work with the data, and then with the, you're working with the stories, and both together are really giving you a bigger picture of what's happening. And so, I mean, even whatever we do, if we're not thinking about the actual stories behind what matters, like for you, the statistics matter. But when I think about what drives me to do work about environmental projects, I think about stories or environments or things like that, or like wayside, like, and so those kinds of stories in other ways, rather than like a number. I'm not really focused on that. And so the stories really are a central part to get to the fuller picture and why things matter.
Do we have any questions in the audience? No, I warned you this moment.
Actually, it's not a question. I want to share briefly a memory of myself in Afghanistan. I'm doing Informatics. I used to work for the government of Afghanistan for the Ministry of Urban Development and Dance. And one of the projects that we were working was National Urban Conference. And we were working on the rapid urbanization in Afghanistan because we were dealing with that kind of fast growth. And we were dealing with lots of problems, and one of the main problems that we were focusing was the waste management and how to make our cities more clean because we didn't have that capacities. And one of the programs that we worked was we asked the theater students of Kabul University to perform for us and to show how we can give that feeling to the audience, to the people, how we can keep our places clean. And they performed in a kind of funny ways, and they were laughing to the performance. They were not laughing to the chart work. They were not laughing to those kind of articles. And it was very, very, very rewarding and very, I think, very interesting. And all these thoughts were reminded of that kind of performance.
So going to motivate engagement in a different way.
Exactly. As you said, we were thinking about the change because we were not able, the city were not able to clean everywhere properly, and we asked people of collaboration, and probably it was helpful. Yeah.
What was the most surprising epiphany that you found through data, storytelling, and theater that you don't think you could have found in any other way?
There's one very, very powerful moment that I always bring up because it just really just was so amazing. When we were doing the workshops, not necessarily the numbers, but we were doing the workshops in Chelsea. And it was intergenerational, so there was a lot of the younger people, but also some of the parents, some of the grandparents. And we were talking about solutions to flooding. And well, I mean, that was the prompt, but then they were acting, right? And they were, was it the still pictures? I think it was like the pictures there. Yeah, and so they had made this, image with their bodies, and what is it? And eventually, they told us what it was. They were just packing to leave. Their response to flooding was to leave, and the mom of one of the kids who was doing that, she was like, what? You know, and so it was that very, it still gives me kind of goosebumps, like that very powerful moment of like, what do you mean you want to leave? This is our home. Like, you know, we've been here for like, I've been here since I was a kid. Like, we created a home for you and you just wanted to leave. And she was saying like how floored she was by learning from her own son with whom she lives, right? That is what he thought of doing and how he thought of the future. That future she had invested in, right? For him to stay, to be able to stay and pull that home. It was like, it was really just, you know, it was amazing. You don't get that in other ways.
Thank you.
Well, we thank you, the Center for Design. Yeah, we're.
Oh, yeah, what's your question?
Oh,
You
how
wanna leave?
Well,
I
I mean, we are like 3 minutes after the.
No, that's almost 30.
Oh, it's 1:30.
You have 30 minutes.
Oh, I'm so worried. I was like, we gotta get through this. Okay, I'm.
No, I mean,
I can
Can I
relax
give you
now.
another answer to that?
Yeah.
Which is, it's not a specific one, but it happened over and over. We keep talking about, data, Peter brings up the story and Peter brings up the. Like, there's an implication that we're gonna make a play about the numbers. And the thing that was most surprising to me repeatedly is that there was emotional, power in not telling a story, in not showing somebody emotional, in just physicalizing the data, in creating a chart, in creating lots of different kinds of charts. There's a emotional transference that happens between the audience and people on stage, right? There's this cathartic effect that I see myself there the same way you get connected to a batter at a baseball game, where I'm down. And that happens with a number, which just blew me away. And that's when, for me, I sort of realized we don't even need to play to do this. So I'm interested in the sort of most abstract side of this, because I think it's still powerful.
Well, that reconnects to design too. Like we have some older evidence that like if you just show someone a bar chart and then show the same bar chart drawn by hand, they're more likely to ask questions about the second thing. And so even just the same representation just drawn by hand, people are more likely to ask questions about the second thing. Informal presentation data. And I think we need to study that more. I think we need to understand those dynamics more about the affordances of the media that we're using to convey information. Because if you want to like get, funding from some group of rich people, you show up with your bar chart and you look true and you look right. But if you're trying to engage people, like in a participatory setting of any type, you're actively defeating your ability to do that by showing up with your PowerPoint slides. Right? You're reducing the chance that they'll engage with you.
And architects have known this for like a long time. Built into CAD software is the option to render the CAD at varying levels of resolution. So there's a version where you can it's just a pull down in one of the menus where you can switch it to wiggly lines. And then the CAD looks more like a sketch that was drawn by hand. And that's the one that you come to the client first with. Because that invites discussion.
Right? We have one JavaScript, we have one library that lets you do that with charts.
Yeah.
But it's not an option that's in all of them. It should be.
Yeah.
It should be.
Well, we should try them.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but if you're making like 500.
and it's called semiotics.
Oh,
Yeah.
The name of the lab.
It's not about the.
Tableau.
The gunbound moment that Sydney's talking about is a really inaccurate representation that you would do in a much more granular and exact way. And the actor says like, well, this is the best we can do. But there's 8 people and it really lands like you want 5 of them to do a certain thing.
Well, I was years ago. I posed my students an exercise. It was, precisely to fight, this idea of abstraction, and they got into the tools for data visualization, and they got trapped into the seduction of technology. And so I said, okay, forget about analysis, forget about this visualization. Try to represent this data set in a way that connects to people, like that makes them understand what is behind the data, not the phenomenon. Make it feel the phenomenon, not see the data. What they did actually, so the brief was very loose, but eventually, all of them, they went physical. There was no instruction. I didn't just say, you have to touch, another thing. They did data physicalization without any precise instruction. they did all sorts of different musicalization. Some did video with sound, some others like really physical captures and things. But it happened like spontaneously. It was really mostly all of them. They kind of found ways that would better my feel on that spontaneous. But that's not my question. But the question is, clearly you have an audience, and so how differently they understand data? So the ones that perform, that's a level of understanding. You embody data, you perform, you learn. Yep. Then there is also an audience, or is that always an audience? Or maybe sometimes it's just the people performing, some others. And how do you take that into account? And what is the difference in terms of learning between audience and performance?
This is a great question. And so different events have different audiences. So the participatory workshops, there is no audience, it is only participants. And so the work we were doing last summer, nobody was watching, or the only people who watched also did. And so then it is about the embodied experience. When we do a performance for an audience, then the goals for what the performers get out of the experience is different than the goals for what the audience is going to get out. The affordances of sitting and watching and voting are different than the affordances of spending 180 hours in the studio sweating, making a thing with your body.
Playing hard.
And so as we're crafting these encounters, we're thinking about what are the goals, right? What's the purpose? And so if the purpose of the numbers was to source community wisdom for the climate action plan and have an audience have some encounter with climate numbers that made them think about their culpability and what they could or couldn't do individually or collectively, that's what we could do. And so as we go into this summer, right, that's one of the things we're really thinking about, because we're doing this community-based tour. We'll have a small group of young people who are intensely involved in the making, and then they'll be showing the work or soliciting feedback from a community of their peers who will see it once. And so what are we doing and who is then an artistic question.
I think a big thing that we haven't talked that much about the community workshops is the piece of it, which is deliberation. They make a thing that takes about 5 minutes, and we spend a long time talking about it. First, like, what do you see in it? What do you see in it? What do you see in it? What are we not seeing that you meant for us to see? Why? And then where? The deliberation piece of it. And one of the big challenges in the production is, especially if we're going to try to make something tight, something crafted, something that we're doing our highest resolution of our blueprinting project, is to leave space for that mess. Is to leave space for the audience to have their conversation. How does that work? We've got 80 people in the room. How can they talk? We tried that in lots of different ways. It happens a lot in the community workshop. The more you're participating, the more you're invited to deliberate also. So that's another artistic question, is how much can we turn the needle way up on the deliberation side? How much less play do we have room for if we're going to do that?
And the model is, so Auguste Boal, who we mentioned earlier, his sort of best known theatrical form is called forum theater. And so forum theater makes the theatrical event a forum for community decision making. So there is a scenario that is shown to the audience that is the image of a problem. And then the audience is invited to step into the shoes of the protagonist to try out different solutions. And then there's a joker, a facilitator, whose role it is to stop the action and facilitate conversation around, well, what did you just see that person do in the intervention? Well, what did it change? Well, what are the implications or unintended consequences of it? And then the point is not the play, the point is the community forum. And one of the sort of key tenets of learning how to facilitate that kind of theater is that you cannot have just a single intervention that then solves the problem. Because that's not actually how problems get solved. And to Jonathan's earlier point, bodies make meaning. There are times when I can walk into a room and with my body making meaning, there are powers that I have that somebody else might not have. Similarly, there are times that I don't have the power to do something someone else does because their body makes different meaning or they have different influence or relationships. And so that becomes a way of doing that. So I don't know exactly if we're gonna do forum theater this summer, like we don't know what the topic is. We don't know like what is the purpose. So we haven't gotten that far to know what it is we're doing really.
Don't have our what yet.
We don't have our what yet, but that's a model that we can think about as we're thinking about deliberation within the performance event. And there are precedents.
Well, it's important that we often talk about this as data theater, right? But it's always for something, right?
Right.
Because in many of my other projects, like the murals, things like that, like the thing that you make is sometimes not the most important part of the puzzle, right? Like in our murals work, the mural is often not the most important part. The process of bringing people together to make it and then having them talk with other people that come to see it yields results 4 years down the line, right? It's the planning work.
Yeah.
And so I think in our data theater work, often it's about the whole process that is happening amongst in many of our cases, the community member troupe, or the people who are representing the story, the people who are there watching it, and the people that came together to create the event that happened. Sometimes that's the biggest outcome, is all of those people coming together around this issue. So like, yeah, that play was great, but like
It's a vehicle for
it's a vehicle for all these other things happening. So often the knowledge being created is that, not necessarily the stuff in the play, which was more of a seed, right?
If you guys know Hitchcock, the concept of the MacGuffin, right? And the MacGuffin is the thing in the play, the thing in the narrative that that organizes all the dramatic action. And you always have to have in public policy. Dan Hill writes about this, but in public policy work, you always have to have the MacGuffin operating, right? So the Maltese Falcon or the Ring in the Lord of the Rings is part of the narrative and it drives that action. In our case, it's making a theatrical production. We have to have meetings and we have to go talk to the city of Boston and we have to go, connect with our community partners. Why? Because we're making a play, of course, right. And so all this, all this activity, all this conversation, all this civic action, this infrastructure happens around, kind of this little maelstrom that we decided that we must have. If you were going to have
my question is related to what you guys just started talking about. I'm really happy that the conversation turned in this direction. My question is, effectively, are you guys thinking about how to measure the outcomes that are a result of all of this maelstrom, the planning work that Rahul alluded to? Are you guys thinking about how to figure out whether this methodology, this data theater methodology, affects more positive change than traditional, quantitative presentations to decision-making bodies? And then if you guys are thinking about that, how to measure it, can you share it?
I mean, I think there's a lot of layers to the answer of that question. So like one of the layers would be policy action, right? Like, could we go back and say, oh yes, the city council voted and here's something specific that we can tie back to this, to this action. I think, so policy action, and that's just one example of a whole lot of things that could happen in the policy space. I think there's also, talking about the people who attend, right? Are we helping them to achieve a new kind of literacy with data and or a sense of agency of engaging in policy conversations? I think that's one aspect of that we hope to measure. There's the question of the students who participate as theatrical agents.
Sure,
actors. Sure. Actors is good. Okay. The actors, they gain new literacies, new practices, new modalities to their work that I think is possible too. I'm probably leaving some out.
Well, and we're collecting data on everything all the time.
Oh my Lord.
So one of the benefits of having okay, so I'm a theater artist. We usually have the change in my pockets and a roll of duct tape to make a project. So that the Mellon Foundation's given us actual resources means that we're collecting data on everything. So yes, and But the methods that we're using for data collection are often embedded in the work that we're doing. So for example, we're looking at data literacy outcomes in workshops. And so at the beginning, we ask people to take a hand poll. How confident are you using data to make decisions? I'm super confident. I'm not confident at all. Where's your hand go? And we take a picture because we take pictures and document everything because Kuhika, who's our videographer, is with us a lot of the time. And then at the end of the workshop, we ask the same question, and where are the hands? And then we're able to measure. Is this like mathematically scientific? No, it's vibesy. But it is capturing a kind of embodied truth and watching the difference between a room full of people whose hands are like this at the beginning and a room full of people whose hands are like this towards the end. So like, is that measurable change? Yes. Are we measuring it like in inches? No, we're not quite doing it like that, but it's within then the spirit of our encounters, because ultimately the why are we doing it? We're much more interested in the experience of the humans than we are in having quantified data for our funder. Also, our funder doesn't totally care about our quantified data. They care about like what we learn about the practice of civic data theater, as opposed to the metrics of the outcomes. I think if we had a different funder, we might have different approaches.
And I just to add that, like, you know, another thing to think about is like the kinds of insights that are generated during these exercises that are not typically generated otherwise.
Right.
And so like any new powerful situation of like, whoa, I never thought of it this way, or I never saw your point of view this way, or like anything like that also counts as, you know, a level of impact of this kind of work.
So let's say one more. Oh,
sorry, I'll add one little bit. We're also like in a like, you know, foundation grant world, like phase 3 or 4 is dissemination. And that's when you get the stuff coming out with like lessons learned, right? And that's probably next year, right? That's like
That's for the fall.
yeah, right. So like that's when we synthesize a bit more. But I mean, you know, like you said, there's short, medium, long-term things, and we're learning a ton about what we think works and things that we can plan.
And a specific part of that dissemination plan is a replication project. So we have funding built into the budget to teach other theatrical groups how to do these practices, and like some of the things that we, you know, done and maybe worked so well, or some of the things we've done and maybe not worked so well. So we have some small there's a portion to do that as well. So that's
well, speaking about that,
yeah.
because I was of course thinking about scalability. You know, if that works, if that makes an impact, how can we scale up that? We can like make it like a modern methodology practice. But then thinking about, you know, for visualization is the same. So here even more, everybody will play differently. So how do you is there really a chance to control over, or maybe
I don't think you want to. So this
then
is
you produce very different uncontrollable insights.
it's gardening, not factory production.
yeah. So all of the work that's done in community sites is local and site specific. It's tailored to that group.
Yeah.
And so next year we do have a replication grant program in which we'll do a little bit of re-granting to get other people in their own very different contexts to try some of these techniques and see what happens within their projects. And they're supposed to be different than ours. Artistically, we've tried a couple of different approaches to making theater from quantitative data, and they all work. So somebody who uses a totally different method of making theater can probably pick up some quantitative data. They'll learn something different than we did, but I suspect that's going to work too. A group who works with seniors who can't move their bodies the way teenagers move their bodies are going to discover something different about the work than we do, but that's also part of it. It wants to tailor.
It's also really important, like doing theater with regular people or for regular people with data is a radical thing to do, right? Like working with data is, as I don't know the right word, it's key. It has multiple layers of gatekeeping around it.
Yeah.
And many of it's self-enforced. Like I'm not a numbers person, right?
Yeah.
Right. So like that, so the act of getting people to feel comfortable working with information through any artistic practice is a radical act that in of itself is impactful and worthwhile. So I'll lay that, like, I'll plant that flag as like just even at a lower level, it's important to recognize that and the impact of that. But no, it's okay if you're not using a spreadsheet for this. That's totally fine. You can still engage.
Yeah, so kind of like going back to scalability, scaling up does not equate to massification or like just like homogenization, right? It's not the
rise at it, right?
And it's definitely not like they're not gonna make their own version of the numbers. That was very particular. I mean, frankly, that was very particular to me. Right? And that's a good thing.
Hey, Danny, I was like, you said something, Danny, the working, right? What about failing?
Oh,
Is there a version of this where it fails? Like, is there, like, could we cause harm? Could someone cause harm with these techniques?
so.
What would that?
So yes, because when we put our bodies in the data, if we're not in there, we can misrecognize and misrepresent that data. And so it is totally possible to cause harm that if I'm a teacher in a class and my students do not represent a data set, like there's no one in the room who has embodied knowledge that is relevant to the data set. And I ask my class to do data theater activities with this data set that doesn't represent them, that they don't understand at all, they will make shit up that is not right and come away with incorrect understandings of the lived experiences of the people in the data set. And so there are ethics and ethical responsibilities, especially dealing with this very contextually thin quantitative data.
So one popular data set for early information visualization is the early information visualization classes is the data set of Titanic deaths, survivors. That's like
I use that.
Yeah, you use that. Well, that I mean, like, who's got lived experience of Titanic sinking? Is that would that be inappropriate to engage with?
I don't know if that would be dangerous per se, but I think that the thing that they would learn would be like they replicate things they've seen about the Titanic from popular culture.
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah,
That's right.
It would be reproductive. Like
Yeah.
replicate. I use that data set all the time in non-embodied context. In embodied context, I tend to use data sets where you could see something that you connect to, and then I give them options to pick between it. In like an analytic context, we have that in one of our question asking activities that is about like learning to ask questions of data sets. Totally fine, right? Doesn't matter if you're not like, if you're scared of water, right? That you'll bring something to it, but like it's irrelevant. But in an embodied context, I do think there's a different set of considerations because of what you bring versus what you bring to a spreadsheet activity version, which is still a question that I ask in my activity design, but it's a different answer.
Well, maybe your personal jeopardy is part of the. Sorry, you were going to say.
No, I was going to say because like danger or harm is like that it's a force multiplier on a message, and so you have to be careful if there's a message. I just remember feeling very strongly like, oh, people are suddenly caring about and believing this thing. So you have to be careful with what the message is.
I mean, we did an example is we did the workshop that used ISORES data with a community group that was predominantly Hispanic, right? Youth.
A lot of kids had to leave the room during.
I think that it was, and they asked for that. They wanted that data to be brought in. So I was very nervous about it. We spent a lot of time. It was actually those 2 weeks of data prep were really hard for me. We spent a lot of time preparing for it, and I think in the end the people in the room were, I don't know if happy is the right word, but like it went in a way that they felt comfortable with.
They appreciated the opportunity.
Yeah. So, and that kind of work requires a kind of trauma-informed facilitation and a close relationship between the facilitators and the workshop team. And so we were working in a team in which we were working in a trauma-informed way. We also had a whole team of people who were part of that site who were there as support. Right, that they were part of the work.
They have relationships with participants, right. They set up the scaffolding, so the harm could be mitigated.
This was a big difference. I found the first time we set foot in Chelsea, I had a real realization that suddenly our work was important. And as a theater maker, I want to present we're playing, and so it's fine. It doesn't matter I'm not gonna do any damage to him with his family. Like the people, our people are real people with real concerns and real shit going on, and like they need our best. So I think the danger is not taking it, not rising to the challenge.
But I don't think any of those considerations are endemic to data theater. I think that's
No.
any community
Yes,
based.
exactly.
So we stand on the shoulders of lots of rats.
Yeah, absolutely.
Please.
How would additional community organizations engage with this type of work?
Come talk to us.
Yeah, we've had Steve.
So in a way, kind of like building on how these partnerships came to be, like a lot of them actually went through the work that I was already doing. So with Livable Streets and with Moderator, with City of Boston, I mean, those all came from partnerships that I was already in. So the relationship building is something that had started earlier, but even me as somebody who's only been in the Boston area for 5 years, I still feel like a newcomer. And so I'm still in constant, and this is something that I just do, is in constant relationship building process with different partners and just like kind of like being open to seeing opportunities and scaffolding in a way those opportunities and saying like, oh, this came up. How about this? And just kind of like part of that relationship building process is bringing these connections together of opportunities with the people and just building things up over time. And as my relationships and our relationships grow, then more opportunities will happen. And we just keep building on them and leveraging them to keep scaling it up and growing it.
Yeah, and so in terms of groups, if there are additional groups who end up having resonance with the topic that we make the summer project on, we could add a couple more performances. So we could add a couple stops on our small local tour. If there are additional groups that are interested in those, like I think that's not a heavy lift. Yeah. And then this sort of environmental justice cycle will wrap the practice this summer, but we'll also then start looking at what's next. And so start building the next set of projects. So groups that have data that they want to make stories from, we can then build the next set of things in those collaborations.
It's tricky because the very finished thing is a very heavy lift. So a powerful tool we can bring to you, it requires a lot.
But the workshops are not easier.
Yeah. On both sides too.
Yeah.
Not just,
that's
not
not
just,
I was talking about us, too.
Yeah, it's a engagement for the organization.
Yeah.
But Dani's email, which she graciously added to this last slide. So if you have a specific connection in mind, please would welcome that. Yeah. And that goes for you online folks as well.
Yes, and if you would like more information about our summer tour, sign up for the Center for the Arts listserv and you'll get all of the information.
Right. We should turn it over to Paolo, who's got
I'm so happy this happened. A very good way to close this spring series. So look forward to the fall series. You will get information soon if you register for the Center for Design. You will get news about the fall series. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
Pleasure having you.
Thank you.